The Devils by Joe Abercrombie was published earlier this year, and it is the first novel of his ever to not be set in the world of the First Law, which all began with the blade itself here behind me. And this book, curiously enough, received a pretty lukewarm reception. Obviously, if you go looking around online, you'll see lots and lots of people head over heels in love with this book. You'll also see a lot of people that didn't care for it at all. But if you scour BookTube, BookTok, and some of the bigger publications that wrote reviews of this book, you'll see a lot of middling commentary, a lot of 3 stars, 5 out of 10, whatever. A lot of people saying, it's fine. And as a big fan of Joe Abercrombie, I was particularly excited for this book. Yes, I didn't pick it up immediately, and even when I did, I didn't get to it immediately, but I'm a mood reader, leave me alone. Point is, when I did finally read it, and I have finally read it, I was so impressed with the decisions that he made with this book. I do not understand why it's received such a lukewarm reception. I even kind of respect the people who really heavily dislike it, because at least there's a bit of a fire there. When things are middling, when things are mid, when things are just fine, it kind of irritates me because it just shows a lack of passion and enthusiasm one way or another. But first, before we get into it, what is The Devils actually about? So, as I said, this is the first novel not set in an entirely fictional world that Joe Abercrombie created. That world has now been explored in 3 trilogies and 3 standalone novels, I believe. And his YA trilogy wasn't received that fondly by adults who read it, because as soon as you hear the phrase YA, some people stick up their noses. I personally thought it was fantastic because I really enjoyed the shifts between protagonists, the protagonist of the very first book being this grumpy, disabled person, and I loved that whole Viking theme and aesthetic. I appreciate the fact that Abercrombie often has protagonists who are very grim, very grey, and often disabled. He does pretty good disability representation, and I respect that. I appreciate it. So if this book isn't set in this entirely fictitious fantasy world, where is it set? Well, that was one of the first things that attracted me to this book. See, The Devils is set in some vague alternate history. It's set in Europe, but the time of that Europe is a little displaced. It doesn't quite feel right. I'm not exactly a history buff, and maybe someone can point to exactly when it's supposed to be set, but I'm not confident enough to say. This is an alternative historical fantasy novel. Our protagonists are a gang of monsters. In some ways, it kind of feels like Joe Abercrombie's version of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, or Stephen Sommers' Van Helsing film, which is a vibe, and recently that film has had a kind of second life with so many people appreciating it, and I'm all here for that. But in the same way that Van Helsing and The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen are kind of like melting pots for various fictional characters, that's also what you get here. The titular Devils is a band of misfits and ne'er-do-wells who have been forced, kind of like a suicide squad, to go do a dangerous task, a very important task. They are working for the church, but each of them, until they are sent on this quest, have been prisoners in a secret hidden prison underneath the holy city itself. And the person guiding this band of ne'er-do-well monsters is a priest who had no idea what he was in for. When he turned up at the holy city, he thought that he was going to get some sort of a promotion. Instead, he's handed this band of monsters who are nicknamed the Devils, and together, as a group who don't see eye to eye, they have to escort a street urchin thief who, it has just been revealed in chapter 2, is in fact a long-lost princess to her throne. She is in fact the lost princess of Troy. All of Europe is engaged in this kind of Game of Thrones civil war situation with different factions at each other's throats. And the Holy City is hoping that by sending her off to Troy to sit on the serpent throne, that she can unite the nations. Despite the fact that she's a thief and that's all she's ever known. She's a pretty fun character, although she isn't consistently written at all. Half the time she comes across as a street smart thief, and the rest of the time she's like this nervous, bumbling, insecure creature. It's a little bit weirdly inconsistent. But apart from her, this group of characters is so much fun, and it's a pretty simple story to follow. It is an adventure tale. It feels a lot like a game of Dungeons and Dragons. You have a party of misfits, a werewolf, a vampire, an elf who can turn invisible just by holding her breath, a useless priest, a thief who's secretly a princess. You tell me this isn't a D&D party. This is quite literally like reading a game of D&D, like watching Dimension 20, Critical Role, listening to NADPod. This is what this is. And as someone who's a big fan of D&D podcasts and who plays D&D, I couldn't have been having any more fun while reading this book. The Devils also just plays around so much with the history, the geography, the culture of various European countries. Because Joe Abercrombie is making this clear that it's a fictional world, a world of werewolves and vampires and elves. As such, he's able to kind of push aside world building for the most part. There is no world that really needs to be built. There's lore, there's history. He needs to spell out what's different in his world compared to our real world. But we all know what a werewolf is. We all know what an elf is. We all know what a vampire is. And so even when he's presenting us with these mythological and supernatural creatures, because we're all so familiar with them, there's very little he needs to do with it. His world is so similar and yet so different from ours, but the differences are already things we understand from popular culture, from folklore, from history books, from mythology, and from fantasy. It's all familiar stuff. If you've never encountered these things in a book of mythology, you've at least seen Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, so there's not really anything that's going to surprise you here. And that means that he can set aside all of this dense fantasy world building and get on with telling a really, really fun story. And fun is the key word here. Joe Abercrombie, after all, is the self-proclaimed grimdark lord of fantasy. Now, obviously, the phrase grimdark actually comes from Warhammer, but grimdark fantasy has been around for a long time, and he is the most famous grimdark author we have writing today. I'm gonna put this down, waving a book around all the time. But his books always have a sense of humor to them. He's a funny writer. I think a lot about Glocta in the first Law trilogy. He's a fantastically funny, dark, sad character. He's the kind of character that makes you laugh a lot and then you kind of feel bad about it because he's curmudgeonly, but he's also so pitifully crippled and broken, not just physically but psychologically. So you so feel sorry for him, but at the same time, he's bloody horrible. And there is so much humor that comes out of the way that he is, just his personality and his dialogue. Joe Abercrombie writes very bleak humor, and it's the kind of humor that I personally love. But I would argue The Devils is the funniest thing he's ever written. There are genuine moments of Terry Pratchett-esque satire, wit, general turns of phrase. I could take a decent handful of lines out of this book and deliver them to you out of context, and you would think they were from a Discworld book. There is a wonderful sense of humor. It's not particularly satirical. Pratchett was all about satirizing, punching up, making a big commentary about politics and religion and other big topics. This book isn't really doing that, but it has that same mastery of language from a humor perspective. It's hilarious. And I'm really, really impressed with the sense of humor in The Devils. Over and over again, I laughed out loud. Now, I have to say that it's very likely that this book will live or die by its characters. And if you don't like this band of characters, there isn't much hope for you. You're not going to build a rapport with this book in the same way that I have if you don't love these characters like I do. About 100 pages into this 500 100-page book, we meet a character called Viga. As it turns out, they've been transporting Viga this entire time. As I said, this D&D-esque party is made up of a very haphazard group of people. An elf who can only turn invisible when she holds her breath. A North African magician who over and over again everyone refers to as a wizard or a sorcerer or a warlock. And he's like, no, I am a magician. There is a specific It's brilliant. Not only that, but he's a necromancer. And the things he does with his necromantic powers, even very early in the book, are disgusting in the most fun and entertaining ways possible. And I mentioned a werewolf. Well, the werewolf is kept secret for a little while. They've all been adventuring and heading down the road off to Troy. They get into a scrape and one of them opens up the cart that they've been pulling. And in the cart is a werewolf. She bursts out of this cage that she's been kept in, and she proceeds to do some of the most explicitly grotesque and gnarly things I think I've ever read in an action scene in a book in my life. It is horrible and it is wonderful. I loved it. It's so gratuitous. And then once the battle is done, we see what she looks like when she's not a werewolf. And she is in fact a massive woman who is 100% all of the time incredibly randy. And she is such a laugh. Her name is Viga, and oh my god, I love her so much. She is such an intense amount of fun. And the dialogue that she shares with the other characters is hysterical. In fact, once she got introduced and kind of reminded me of the character I'm currently playing in my D&D campaign, I was like, oh my god, this is fun. I should have been a werewolf. Viga is everything. I love her so much. But I can't tell you where her story goes or anyone else's story goes because I don't want to spoil anything. In fact, maybe even her reveal alone is a bit of a spoiler, but I get too worried about that stuff. I've seen some of the criticism about this book, and I think one thing that a lot of people typically seem to agree on is that it's not fantastical enough. They don't like the fact that it's set in our world, they don't like the history, whatever. I personally think it's a wonderful breath of fresh air. And as someone who loves monsters, like, I talk a lot about horror on this channel, but I'm not always in the mood for horror. And right now I'm very much not. But I am always in the mood for monsters specifically. Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, any kind of werewolf monster creature. I love them. I love monsters and I enjoy when they turn up in historical fiction, fantasy fiction, horror, I don't care. I live for monsters. I'm a huge fan. And the monsters in this book, the way that they're treated, the camaraderie between them, it is my perfect D&D adventuring party RPG kind of situation. And it's become very apparent that that is not for everyone. But I think it's incredibly frustrating for people to feel so mild, so lukewarm, so, I guess, unimpressed. I've seen so many reviews, I've read headlines, I've gone through articles, posts on Goodreads, booktube videos, whatever. There's so much mid around this book. So many people saying, yeah, it's fine, but it's not his best. Okay, but I think it's his most entertaining. Maybe people have a problem with that when it comes to grimdark fantasy. They don't expect it to be as fun and adventurous as this book is. It's not always adventurous. In fact, it's quite tragic in places. It's kind of heartbreaking, and anyway, I don't want to go into it, but adventure is kind of at the heart of it, and this wonderful sense of humour that this book has. Again, Abercrombie has been subtly weaving humour into all of his books, but this one, it is bursting at the seams. I laughed out loud so many times. And I think maybe people weren't expecting that. They weren't expecting the adventure. They weren't expecting all of the monsters. They weren't expecting this wonderful sense of humour. But honestly, if Terry Pratchett had written a grim, dark story about monsters set in an alternate history, this is what it would have been. And I'm so impressed by that. For him to do something like this, it's so different, it's so refreshing, and people do seem to balk at things that are different. Joe Abercrombie is a big name in fantasy. He stands shoulder to shoulder with Brandon Sanderson and Robin Hobb. In fact, I follow him on Instagram and he was posting pictures at a convention with all of these people, and I'm so happy for him. I personally think he's better than Brandon Sanderson and Patrick Rothfuss, and I'm annoyed that this book has had such a lukewarm reception when in fact it is such a daring kind of 90-degree hairpin turn away from hairpins are more than 90 degrees. That's the whole point. Anyway, epic fantasy, grimdark fantasy, it needs a shakeup. This is a shakeup. This is something different. And there are lots of shakeups being done all the time in the realms of fantasy, but usually by smaller authors, or not literally small, or maybe smaller, I don't know. By like smaller named authors or debut authors who come in with an invigorating new approach to the genre. But this is one of the big names. He's like in the top 10 names of fantasy in the entire world right now. And he's gone, hey, here's something entirely different. And I've gone, thank you. Thank you for the humor. Thank you for the monsters. Thank you for the strange alternate history. Thank you. So yeah, I'm very annoyed by just how wrong everyone is for looking at this book and going, it's alright. Like, it's not alright. I'd rather you hate it, because this book deserves a decent, visceral, emotional reaction. It's certainly got that out of me. I don't know how it couldn't. Except I loved it. I really loved it. I'm really glad that Abercrombie has done something so fresh and unique here. So if you haven't read The Devils, it is absolutely worth your time, especially if you love weird characters, monsters, fantasy fiction, historical fiction. It's all of those things. Well, it's not really historical fiction, but that's kind of the fun of it. So please check it out. And if you really like morally grey characters, strange monsters, twisted horror stories, and well, it is spooky season after all, and this is my book, Managing and Other Lies, a collection of short stories. They're all queer, they're all horror stories, they're really, really twisted and messed up, and I'm very, very proud of them. So there are links in the description. Go check it out. Review it if you've read it and you haven't reviewed it yet. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Read some spooky stuff. It is autumn now after all, the best season. Check this out. Check this out. Support me on Patreon if you enjoy this channel. I really would appreciate your support. I love my patrons so much. They keep the channel going and I'm grateful every single day for their support. If you can spare $1, $3, I would so appreciate it. Thank you so much. And subscribe for books.